The apartment was small. Not in the way her dorm room had been small, tight and institutional, the kind of small that apologized for itself. Senate was sitting on the couch with nothing in her hands. No book. No phone. No television. Just sitting the way a person sits when they have arrived somewhere and thinking about the next thing to do with their lives. She had graduated 3 weeks ago. The graduation was real, she had looked at it enough times to be certain. It was sitting in its frame on the shelf beside Amina's photograph, which was also real, which had also been looked at a great many times in the past 3 weeks. Her mother in the photo was young and smiling with the specific full expression of someone who believes the best of whatever is coming next. Senate looked at that photograph for a long time. The apartment was as quiet tonight as it had been on every other night since graduation. Then her phone rang. She looked at the screen. The star. The man she had only just begun to call her father. She answered. "Are you busy?" His voice was the same as always, careful, measured, with that quality of steadiness that had felt like solid ground from the very first night he replied to her message. She looked around the empty apartment. No. A pause. She could hear him considering his words. He always considered his words, she had learned that about him, and then he said something she had not been prepared for. He wanted her to move into his home. Not a place nearby. Not an arrangement where she lived in some building he owned a few streets over. His home. The penthouse. Her own bedroom, her own space, a life shared under the same roof. He said it was for safety. He said it was for family. He said several other careful measured things that were all true and all pointed towards something neither of them had a word for yet, something that was still being built, still finding its shape, still too new and too important to rush. When he finished speaking, the apartment was very quiet. Senate looked at Amina's photograph on the shelf. Her mother, who had spent her entire life running from this man's world. Who had changed cities and changed her name and changed everything she had to change so that her daughter would grow up completely free of it. Who had made the hardest decision of her life with absolute conviction and carried it entirely alone for years. And now that daughter was sitting in a quiet apartment in Seoul, being asked to walk straight into the heart of it. She closed her eyes. Held that contradiction in her hands for a moment. Turned it over. Felt the full weight of it. Then she opened her eyes. "Okay," she said. A brief silence. "Okay. I will come." 3 seconds passed. She counted them without meaning to. And in those 3 seconds, in the space between her answer and whatever he was going to say next, she heard something in his breathing that she had never heard from him before. Something that lived just underneath the calm. Something that he would never name out loud because it was not the kind of thing men like calm Wu-jin named out loud. Relief. Pure, unguarded relief. The most feared man in Seoul, relieved that his daughter had said yes. They said goodbye and she hung up. She sat for a moment longer. Then she looked at Amina's photograph one more time. "I know," she said softly to it. To her mother's full young smile, to the certainty in those photographed eyes, to the woman who had made every sacrifice she could think of and still left one star behind just in case. "I know what you would say." She stood up. Started looking around the apartment at the things she would need to pack. "But I am staying," she said. And the photograph, as always, said nothing. But somehow felt, as always, like an answer anyway. Before Senate arrived, Kang Woo-jin did something that nobody in his organization had ever seen him do. He prepared. Not the way he prepared for meetings. Not the controlled, efficient preparation of a man who has been running a criminal empire for 20 years, reading the room, anticipating every angle, arriving knowing more than everyone else and letting them figure that out as the conversation progressed. This was different. This preparation had a quality of uncertainty to it. Of genuine, unfamiliar concern about getting something wrong. He ordered books. His assistant placed the order without comment, which was the correct professional response, but the slight pause before she confirmed told him she had read the titles. He did not explain them. 3 books on parenting. 2 on raising adolescent daughters. 1 specifically about building relationships with adult children after long absences. The kind of books that people with normal lives bought in airport bookshops with slightly embarrassed faces. Wu-jin read all of them with the same focus he brought to financial strategy. He took notes in the margins. He folded down page corners. He underlined things and then went back and underlined different things when he understood them better the second time through. His most trusted lieutenant came into the kitchen one morning, saw one of the books open on the counter next to a coffee cup, and quietly left the room without saying a word. This was also the correct professional response. He had her bedroom repainted. He spent longer than he was comfortable admitting choosing the colors, nothing too bright, nothing that would feel like he was guessing at who she was. Clean walls. Simple furniture. A desk with good light for reading and working. A bookshelf, empty, waiting. He asked his housekeeper, Mrs. Park, a woman who had worked for him for 11 years and who had never once commented on anything she witnessed in his household, what a young woman in her early 20s would need in her bedroom. Mrs. Park produced a list so thorough and so practical that he read it twice and ordered everything on it, including several items whose purpose he could not immediately identify and did not ask about. And then there was the matter of the flowers. He had found it out the careful way, which was the only way he knew, through a conversation weeks ago, a small detail she had mentioned without realizing she was giving anything away. She had been describing her mother's apartment. The window above the parking lot. The plant Amina called their garden. And then she had mentioned, one line, moving past it quickly, the flowers her mother always kept on the sill. A particular kind. Associated with home. Associated with Amina specifically, in the way certain things become inseparable from certain people. He found them. It took 3 calls to 3 different florists before someone knew exactly what he meant. He had them placed in a white vase on the windowsill of Senet's room the morning she arrived. When she walked through the door of the penthouse for the first time as someone who lived there, not a visitor, not a guest, someone who actually lived there, he showed her through the space with a carefully maintained neutrality, pointing out practical things, the kitchen, the terrace, where everything was kept. He was aware, the entire time, that he was carrying himself with the particular tightness of a man who has put a great deal of effort into something and is now terrified of the response. He opened the door to her bedroom. She walked in. Stopped. He watched her see the vase on the windowsill. Watched the stillness move through her, the way a person goes completely still when something unexpected touches something very deep, very quickly. She turned around and looked at him standing in the doorway. He looked back at her. Keeping his face in order. Trying to look like a man who did not need to be told whether he had gotten it right. How did you know? She said. He held the question for a moment. Your mother mentioned them once. Senate turned back to the flowers. She stood there looking at them with her arms loose at her sides, the way she stood when she was feeling something she had not yet decided how to express. Wu-jin stood in the doorway and held his breath. He had negotiated with dangerous men across tables in dark rooms. He had made decisions that changed the shape of entire networks. He had sat in boardrooms where the wrong word could end careers or worse. He had never waited for anything the way he waited for whatever she was going to say next. She said nothing. She just stood there and looked at the flowers her mother used to keep on a windowsill above a parking lot, 1,000 miles and years away from here. And somehow, in the silence, he understood that he had gotten it right. Living together revealed everything. Wu-jin was a man of complete and absolute routine. He was awake at 5:30 every morning, not because an alarm told him to be, but because his body had simply decided this was correct and had refused to accept any argument against it for the past 15 years. Coffee at exactly 6. The apartment in complete silence until 8, which was not a rule he had ever needed to state out loud because the people who worked in his home had understood it immediately and without explanation. Everything had its place. Everything had its purpose. The kitchen was organized with a precision that would have impressed a surgeon, every cabinet logical, every shelf arranged by frequency of use, every item exactly where it should be. Seoul was not a person of complete routine. She was awake at 11 some nights and at 3 in the morning on others, depending entirely on what her mind had decided to do without consulting her. She left books open face down on flat surfaces throughout the apartment, the coffee table, the kitchen counter, once inexplicably on the floor outside the bathroom. She had a way of starting tasks and then setting them aside mid-completion that Wu-jin found both baffling and strangely fascinating to observe. And then there was the coffee. On her third morning in the apartment, she made Ethiopian coffee. The real process, beans roasted slowly on a small flat pan, the smell rising and deepening and spreading through the space in a way that was not subtle, not quiet, not anything that could be described as background. His security team, 2 men in the outer corridor, exchanged a look. The one who spoke less went to check the ventilation system. Wu-jin stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched her with an expression he was working hard to keep neutral. She looked up and saw his face. "It's coffee," she said. "I know what coffee is. This is better coffee." He did not confirm this out loud. But he accepted the cup she held out. And he drank it. And it was, in fact, better coffee. He did not tell her that either. She also talked to Amina's photograph. Not constantly, not in a way that filled the apartment with sound. But sometimes, passing it on the shelf, or in the evenings when the city darkened outside and the penthouse went quiet in its particular way, she would say something to it. A few words. Sometimes a question, though she never waited for an answer. It was less like grief and more like correspondence, keeping someone informed who happened to be unavailable. He walked past her room one evening and heard her voice through the slightly open door. "He reorganized the entire kitchen today," she was saying, in the conversational tone of someone giving a perfectly routine update. "Every single thing has a label now. I don't know how to tell him I think it's actually helpful." Wu-jin stood in the corridor for 3 full seconds. Then he walked back to his office, sat down at his desk, and allowed himself a small private smile that nobody in the world was there to see. They figured out the in-between things slowly. Who controlled the apartment temperature, a negotiation that was technically never resolved but practically settled in her favor within the first week, because she was home more and he was, if he was honest with himself, willing to concede it. Who occupied the kitchen in the morning? They established an overlap period of roughly 20 minutes between 6:15 and 6:35 that was comfortable for both of them and involved very little conversation, which suited them equally. What counted as comfortable silence versus the kind that needed addressing? He learned that she needed 30 minutes after waking up before she was willing to engage with anything complex. She learned that he was not cold in those early morning hours, he was simply conserving himself, saving his words for when they would be needed. She started leaving one of her books on the kitchen counter in the evenings. He started leaving a second coffee cup out when he made his own in the mornings, without discussing it. Small things. Practical things. The kind of things that seem unremarkable until you step back and realize they are the building material of something important. Something that felt, slowly and quietly and without any announcement, like home. Outside the walls of the penthouse, however, the world told a different story. Seoul had graduated with a first-class degree in economics. She had a thesis that her faculty advisor had described, in writing, as one of the finest pieces of undergraduate work in the department in a decade. She had references and she had capability and she had the specific kind of hunger that good organizations are supposed to want, the hunger of someone who genuinely cares about the work, not just the title. The rejection letters came anyway. Politely worded. All slightly different in language and all identical in meaning. Her applications were impressive. They had many strong candidates. They would keep her details on file. The kind of language that is technically truthful and communicates nothing honest. One organization, a development economics research group she had followed since her second year, whose published work she had annotated and debated with herself in the margins of 3 printed papers, called her in. 3 rounds. Each interview more detailed than the last, each panel more engaged, more visibly interested in what she had to say. She answered every question with the precision that came naturally to her, connecting theory to practice, showing her thinking out loud in a way that made the interviewers lean slightly forward in their chairs. She came home after the 3rd round feeling, for the first time in weeks, like something was opening. The offer never came. She found out, indirectly, through someone she had met briefly in the professional network she was slowly building, a cautious word, apologetically delivered, that the panel had been impressed. That the decision had not been straightforward. That her name, when it was looked into, had raised questions that the organization was not positioned to navigate. Her name. Not her work. Her name. She came home that evening and set her bag down at the door. She went to the kitchen. She got a glass of water and stood at the counter and drank it looking out at the city. Then she sat down on one of the stools and looked at her hands. She had done everything correctly. She knew that. 4 years of work. A thesis her professors had kept. 3 rounds of interviews in which she had been, she was not being arrogant, she was being accurate, exactly what they were looking for. She had prepared. She had shown up. She had answered every question with her whole mind and she had left every room knowing she had given everything she had to give. And it had not been enough. Not because of anything she did. Because of a name she had only known for a few months and had never asked for. Kong Wu-jin came in and looked at her the way he looked at things when he was reading them, carefully, fully, not missing anything. He poured himself a glass of water and sat down across from her. "Tell me," he said. She looked up. "Tell me whatever you have decided not to say." She held his gaze for a moment. She was weighing the familiar calculation, the one she had been making her whole life, the one about how much of your actual situation you let the people around you see, and how much you carry quietly so as not to add your weight to theirs. She put her fork down. And she told him. The rejections. The interviews. The panel that had leaned forward. The offer that had not come. The reason it had not come. He listened without interrupting. This was something she had noticed about him from the very beginning, the quality of his listening. He gave it completely, the way her mother had, the way very few people actually do. When she finished, the apartment was quiet. "I will make some calls," he said. Not a threat. Just a fact, stated the way facts are stated by a man who has made calls like that before and knows exactly what they produce. No. The word came immediately, before she had even consciously decided to say it. He looked at her. "I don't want to get somewhere because of your name." She kept her voice level but her eyes were steady and certain. "I have spent my whole life being affected by your name without ever choosing it. I am not going to use it now either." The kitchen was very quiet. He held her gaze for a long moment. She did not look away. And then something shifted in his expression, not defeat, not frustration, but something closer to recognition. The specific recognition of a man who has just understood something fully, in a way that lands differently than understanding it in theory. He nodded once. "Okay." She picked up her fork. He sat with his water glass. Saying nothing. Looking at the kitchen counter. Sitting with the weight of what it means to have built something powerful enough to cast a shadow over someone who never asked to stand in it, and to have that shadow land on the person you would most have wanted to protect from it. What Sinead did not know was that the shadows were shifting in directions she couldn't see. Kong Wu-jin's organization was under pressure. Not the dramatic, visible kind, not rival factions moving against him directly, because direct confrontation with Kong Wu-jin was not something serious people attempted. This was something more patient. More surgical. A coalition had been building for months in the spaces he was not watching, the legitimate business spaces, the parts of his empire that he had been carefully constructing as a bridge away from dangerous operations. Banks quietly pressured by people with the right connections. Business partners receiving visits from men whose tone was entirely polite and whose implications were entirely clear. Supply chains disrupted in ways that left no fingerprints, that looked entirely like ordinary misfortune when examined individually and only revealed a pattern when someone looked at all of them together. His legitimate operations were bleeding. Not dramatically. Slowly. From 100 small wounds that each one seemed survivable until you counted them all at once. His lieutenants brought him solutions. They sat in his boardroom and laid out their strategies, and every single one of them pointed in the same direction: back. Return to the old methods. More dangerous operations. More exposure. More of everything he had been carefully and deliberately moving away from for 3 years. He listened to all of it. He asked the right questions. He gave nothing away with his face, because he never gave anything away with his face. He sat through 2 hours of strategy presentations in a room full of men who had been with him for years and who were, all of them, genuinely trying to help, men who understood the language of force and leverage and the particular calculus of power that had governed his world for 2 decades. They were not wrong to offer what they offered. It was the only toolkit they had. But every solution they proposed would undo 3 years of work. Every path back to the old operations was a door closing on the future he had been trying to build, not just for himself, but for something he had not fully named yet until it walked into his life wearing Amina's eyes and his own stubbornness and carrying 4 years of economic theory like a quiet weapon. He was not willing to close that door. He just did not yet know how to keep it open. And then he went home. He did not tell Senate any of it. He kept his business life and his home life on separate tracks, the way a person keeps 2 things valuable enough to be ruined by contact with each other apart and carefully isolated. She was not part of this world. She was never going to be part of this world. That was the one thing he had decided about all of this before she had even moved in, the one line that was not a negotiation. He was wrong, of course. But he did not know that yet. Senate had always noticed. It was not something she had cultivated deliberately, it was simply how she moved through the world. She noticed the small shifts in how people carried themselves. She noticed when a conversation changed temperature without any change in words. She noticed the things that were absent as readily as the things that were present. She noticed that his phone calls ended the moment she entered a room. Not abruptly, he was too controlled for abrupt, but they resolved themselves with a speed that had nothing to do with the natural ending of conversations. She noticed the quality of tension in the 2 lieutenants she sometimes passed in the corridor, a tightness that sat differently from ordinary professional stress. She noticed the way he was present at dinner, physically there, eyes forward, responding when spoken to, but somewhere else at the same time. She noticed all of it. She filed it away. She waited. Then one morning she was walking past his office and the door was open by a few inches and she was not trying to see anything, was not slowing her pace or angling her walk. But her eyes caught the document spread across his desk the way eyes catch things they recognize, instinctively, immediately, before the conscious mind has decided to look. 2 seconds. That was all. She was past the door and continuing down the corridor and her face had shown nothing. But her mind had already started moving. She sat at her desk. She opened her laptop. And she began doing what she had been trained to do, what she had discovered, over 4 years of studying economic theory and financial systems, that she was genuinely good at. She pulled public information. She cross-referenced disrupted business connections across a 3-month period. She mapped the timeline of the pressure points, the sequence of them, and then she did the thing that her thesis advisor had once told her was her particular gift, she looked for the logic underneath. The assumption the strategy was built on. The thing the people who designed it believed to be true. She found it in the second day of looking. The coalition's entire approach had a structural flaw. Not a small one, a fundamental one. A gap that existed precisely because the people who had built the strategy thought entirely in terms of power and intimidation. They had never studied legitimate financial systems from the inside. They did not know what she knew about how those systems actually responded to pressure of this kind, what the regulatory landscape looked like from an economic standpoint, where the legitimate countermoves were hiding in plain sight. She sat with it for 3 days. Turned it over. Made sure she was right. Made sure she was not missing anything obvious. Asked herself, with the specific rigor she brought to every argument she had ever written, what the strongest objection to her analysis would be, and then answered it. On the 4th day, she walked into his office. She placed a document on his desk. She sat down across from him. She said nothing. He looked at her. Then he picked up the document. He read it once quickly, the way he read everything first, getting the shape of it, understanding the architecture before examining the details. Then he went back to the beginning and read it properly. He put it down 20 minutes later and looked at the woman sitting across from him. Not the document. Her. He made one call. His head financial advisor arrived in 12 minutes, which was, for this man, a speed that communicated something about the urgency of the summons. He was given the document. He read it at the table, which was unusual. He was a meticulous man who normally took things away to review in controlled conditions. He read it twice. Then he lowered it slowly to the table. "Where did this come from?" he said. Wu-jin looked at his daughter. She was sitting with the particular calm that he recognized because he had been trying to identify where it came from since he first saw her in person, that capacity to occupy a room without demanding anything from it. His composure, he understood now. Her mother's gentleness around it. Both things fully present in one person. He had spent his life building an empire. He had made decisions that most people would not have the stomach for. He had sat across from men who had been doing this for decades and known things they did not know and used those things precisely. And this girl, who had arrived in Seoul on a scholarship, who had survived 8 months of quiet destruction from a man who thought she had nothing, who had texted a stranger one terrified night and changed both their lives, had just handed him a counter-strategy that 20 years of criminal experience and a full team of advisors had failed to find. "She is mine," he said quietly. Every man in that room heard it. Every man in that room understood exactly what those 3 words meant, coming from Wu-jin, in that tone, in this context. Senate looked back at him. She did not look away. She did not shrink from the weight of the moment. She sat in it completely, the way she sat in everything, not performing confidence, just possessing it, the way you possess things that were built into you before you knew to be proud of them. 3 days after the strategy worked, after the coalition found itself outmaneuvered through channels so legitimate and so precisely targeted that they could not even clearly name what had happened to them, he called her into his office alone. He told her the full picture. Not the summary version, not the edited version. The whole thing, the pressure campaign, the bleeding operations, the solutions his people had brought that all pointed back toward darkness, and what her document had done instead. Then he offered her a position. He said it formally because it was a formal thing. Her own office. A team she would choose. Full access to every legitimate operation he ran. Real work. Real responsibility. The kind of role that her qualifications had earned and that the outside world had been telling her for 3 months she could not have. She listened to everything. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. "I will take it," she said. He exhaled, just slightly, just enough to be visible. "On one condition." He looked at her steadily. "The other operations." She said it simply. No drama in her voice. Just clarity. "The ones that run in the dark. I want them gone." The office changed temperature. He told her it was not simple. He meant this honestly, it was the truth, and she deserved the truth. He told her the scale of it, the scope, what was woven in and how deep the roots went. He did not soften any of it. He told her what it would cost to extract it, in time, in resources, in resistance from the people who depended on it. She listened to every word. Then she said something so quietly that it almost did not reach him across the desk. My mother worked 3 jobs for years so I would never have to be connected to what you are describing. She was not accusing him. Her voice was not angry. It was the voice of someone telling a true thing that needed to be told. She gave up everything. Her city. The person she loved. Her whole life. So I could be free of this. She looked at him directly. And now you are sitting across from me explaining why it has to stay. The office was completely silent. He looked at his hands. These hands that had built an empire, decision by decision, year by year, each choice made with a reason, most of the reasons sound at the time, all of them adding up to something he was only now, in this office, with this person across from him, seeing in full. It will take time, he said finally. His voice was steady. The statement was a promise. I know, she said. I will help you. He looked up. And he saw Amina. Not literally, he knew who he was looking at. But in the composure of her, in the certainty of her, in the love that did not issue ultimatums but did not look away either, in all of that he saw the woman who had made the same kind of immovable, gentle, absolute demand of the world years ago and never once compromised it. She would have liked you, he said. The words came out before he had made a decision to say them. Senet's eyes filled. The slow, quiet way they did, not a collapse, just an arrival of feeling. She smiled through it. She did like me, she said. She raised me. It did not happen overnight. Nothing real ever does. But it began. Senet moved into her office at the end of that week. She spent the first 3 days getting the measure of the space, then she built her team, slowly, deliberately, choosing each person with the same care she brought to everything. She was not looking for loyalty to his name. She was looking for competence, for integrity, for people who understood what legitimate work actually required. Some of them were surprised to find themselves working for her. None of them were disappointed once they started. Kong Wu-jin watched her work with the particular quality of attention he gave to things that earned it. He watched her negotiate with partners twice her age who made the mistake of underestimating her exactly once and adjusted their approach immediately after. He watched her find solutions in places his most experienced people had not thought to look, not because she was smarter than all of them, but because she came from outside the framework they had all been operating inside for so long they had stopped seeing the walls. He began making changes on his side. Quietly, deliberately, one closed door and one opened legitimate one at a time. Some of his lieutenants did not understand the direction. Some of them pushed back. One, whose entire identity was built on the operations Kong Wu-jin was dismantling, left entirely. He let him go without argument. One of his oldest advisors, a man who had been with him since the beginning, who had survived everything the empire had ever passed through, came to him privately one evening. Not to argue. Not to resist. Just to ask, in the direct way that old and trusted people can sometimes ask, whether he was certain. Kong Wu-jin looked at the man for a moment. Yes, he said. Because of the girl. He thought about that. About whether it was accurate to reduce it to that. About whether anything that had happened in the past months could be reduced to a single cause the way simple things could. Because she showed me something I already knew and had been avoiding, he said. She did not cause this. She just made it impossible to keep looking the other way. The advisor nodded slowly. Said nothing more. Left. He held the direction because one evening he walked past her office at 9 at night, the rest of the building quiet and mostly dark, and through the glass he saw her still at her desk. Not struggling. Not grinding through exhaustion. Just working, fully focused, completely present, in the way that people work when they genuinely believe in what they are doing. He thought about Amina coming home after a double shift. Thought about her asking how Senet's day was before she had even sat down. Thought about a woman who had carried an enormous thing entirely alone and never once let the weight of it show in front of her daughter. He kept going. Something shifted across the following months. Kong Wu-jin's name did not disappear. It was not going to disappear, it had been in the city too long, pressed too deeply into too many things to simply lift away cleanly. But it changed shape. The fear around it became something different, more complicated, less purely dark. The kind of complicated that comes from a man who is powerful and known to be powerful but who is no longer operating exclusively in the shadows. Respect is a different thing from fear, and it builds differently and it produces different results. And that shift, small as it still was, incomplete as it remained, changed the atmosphere around Seoul in ways she had not anticipated. The rejection stopped. Not all at once. But the quality of the conversations she was having in her professional network changed. People approached her differently. A young woman she had met briefly at an industry event sent her a message asking if she wanted to get coffee. She said yes, expecting nothing much. The conversation lasted 3 hours. Another followed, and then there was a small, real, genuine circle of people forming around her, drawn not by her father's name, not by proximity to power, but by who she actually was. Her precision. The dry humor that appeared without warning and caught people completely off guard. The warmth she gave to people she trusted, which was not everyone but was real when it happened. She came home one evening and told him over dinner that she had been out with friends the night before. He looked up from his food. "Friends," he said. Not a question, more like he was tasting the word, making sure he had heard it correctly. "Yes. Multiple people. Who wanted to spend time with me. Voluntarily." He looked at her for a moment. "I know what friends are, Seoul. Do you?" She tilted her head with the particular expression she had, the one that was completely serious and completely teasing at exactly the same time. "Name one." He opened his mouth. He closed it. She raised one eyebrow and waited. And Kong Wu-jin, the most feared man in Seoul, who had not been caught without an answer by anyone in longer than he could accurately remember, laughed. Not a polite laugh, not the controlled social version. A real one, the kind that moved through his whole chest, the kind she had been slowly and patiently drawing out of him, 1 month and one conversation and one perfectly timed raised eyebrow at a time. Something in the room felt like a window opening in a space that had been sealed for years. And then there was someone. A young man she mentioned once, briefly, while describing a networking event she had attended. She was telling him about the event itself, the speakers, the conversations she had found worthwhile, and the young man's name appeared in one sentence and then she moved on. But the way his name appeared, slightly more carefully placed than the other names, given a slightly different quality of space around it, told Kong Wu-jin everything he needed to know. He found out more over the following weeks in the way fathers always find out, through the accumulation of details that individually mean nothing and collectively mean everything. A name that appeared a second time. A message she took to her room to answer. A smile that arrived on her face while she was looking at her phone and that she adjusted when she noticed he was in the room. Quiet. Serious. Someone who had looked at her, not at her father's shadow, not at what her last name now meant, but at her. And kept looking. He did not ask her about him directly. That was not how they operated. They had built a language between them that respected the space around things, that let important matters arrive in their own time rather than being forced into the open before they were ready. But he noticed more carefully after that. The way she laughed differently when she came back from certain evenings. The way she was sometimes more thoughtful than usual in a way that had a different quality than her ordinary thinking, lighter, slightly distracted, like part of her mind had chosen somewhere pleasant to be and the rest of her was only half present. He recognized it because he knew what it looked like. He had spent years in a world where he never allowed himself to look like that. He understood what it meant when someone made you look like that. Kong Wu-jin sat with that knowledge in the particular way of a man whose daughter is no longer entirely his to protect and who is discovering, unexpectedly, that this is not something he can prepare for by reading a book about it. He had read the books. None of them had covered this specific feeling, the mixture of something that was almost loss and something that was entirely, unmistakably, the opposite of loss. The invitation came in the form of an official letter, which was how these things arrived, formal, printed, carrying the weight of something that had been decided by people in rooms he had not been in. A formal industry recognition event. The kind that brought together senior figures from finance, development economics, and policy, the legitimate world at its most visible and most deliberate. And at this event, among those being recognized for notable work in legitimate financial strategy, was his daughter's name. Senate read the letter twice at the kitchen counter. Then she put it down and looked at him across the room. He looked back at her. Neither of them said anything. But the silence had a quality to it, full rather than empty, the way silences are between people who have built enough language between them that the spaces carry meaning too. On the night of the event, he knocked on her bedroom door. She opened it. She was dressed and ready, which had the effect of making the moment feel more significant than even the occasion required. She looked like someone who knew exactly who she was and had decided to dress accordingly. He was holding a small box. He held it out. She opened it. A necklace. Simple and elegant in the way that things are when they have been made with genuine care and no interest in showing off. A single small star on a thin chain. The star was not decorative in a generic sense, it was specific, deliberate, chosen. "It was your mother's," he said. His voice was entirely steady. He had practiced being entirely steady for this moment. "She left it with some things that I kept. I should have given it to you sooner." Senate took the box with both hands. She looked at the necklace for a long time. The star caught the light the way stars do, throwing it back changed, warmer. She looked up at him. Then she held it out. "Put it on for me." He took it from the box with hands that were not entirely steady, a detail she noticed and did not mention. He stepped behind her. She lifted her hair. He worked the clasp with the focused attention of a man doing something important and wanting to get it exactly right. When it settled against her collarbone, she looked at it in the mirror for a moment. Then she turned around. They stood side by side. His daughter in her mother's necklace, the star at her throat. Both of them knowing what they were looking at and neither of them needing to say it. Then they walked out together. The event hall was the kind of place that had been built to make people feel the weight of what happened inside it. High ceilings. Warm light. The particular hum of a room full of people who are there on purpose, who care about why they came, who have done real things to earn their place at these tables. Kong Wu-jin sat in the front row. Not off to the side. Not toward the middle. The front row, in the center, with his name on the seat and his presence filling the space around it the way his presence always did, complete and still and something that people felt before they fully registered it. He had not hidden himself since the night outside her dormitory. But this was different from those early cautious Saturday afternoons in his office. This was public. This was a room full of people who knew his name and were now processing the presence of his face in their front row and adjusting their understanding of several things simultaneously. He sat through the program with the total stillness that was his natural state in formal settings. The speeches. The other recognitions. The applause that moved through the room at intervals like weather. When they called her name, he watched her walk to the front. She moved through the room the way she moved everywhere, not hurrying, not performing, simply going directly to where she was going. She stood at the front and she spoke, and her voice was clear and measured and warm in the specific way that her voice was warm, not effusive, not performed, just genuinely present. She thanked the people who deserved thanking. She said something about the work that made the room lean slightly forward. He watched every second of it. He thought about a dorm room at midnight. About a door shaking in its frame. About 4 words typed with shaking hands into a dead woman's phone. About a number saved under a star, just in case, by a woman who had believed this day was possible when it was nothing but a hope. He thought about Amina. He thought about everything she had carried alone. The city she had left. The life she had built from nothing. The daughter she had raised to be exactly this, this precise, this resilient, this quietly extraordinary, with no one to help her do it. He thought about 3 jobs and a parking lot garden and a humming in the kitchen and a photograph still in its frame on a shelf in a penthouse where her daughter now lived. Senate finished speaking. The room filled with applause. And Wu-jin stood up. He did not stand because protocol required it. He stood because something in his chest rose and his legs followed it, and there was no force in the room capable of keeping him in his seat. He stood and he looked at his daughter at the front of the room, and his eyes, which had not shown anything uncontrolled in a room full of people in more years than he could count, filled completely. He did not look away. He did not reach for composure or remind himself where he was or do any of the things a man of his particular reputation might be expected to do in this situation. He just let her see it. All of it. Every year of absence condensed into this moment, every missed year worth something because it had all been quietly accumulating toward this one, his daughter, standing at the front of a room that was applauding everything she had become. She found him in the applause. Across the room, through the sound and the movement and all those people who had come to see something be recognized, she found his face. She was not looking for him in the way you look for something uncertain. She knew exactly where he was. She had known where he was the entire time. And she saw him standing. And she saw his eyes. She had seen him in many configurations over the past months. She had seen him controlled and commanding in boardrooms. She had seen him careful and slightly lost in the kitchen at 6 in the morning before his coffee. She had seen him read her strategy document and understand in 20 minutes what it had taken her 3 days to build. She had seen him, once, standing outside her bedroom door with flowers and a face trying very hard not to need anything from her answer. She had not seen him like this. Undone. Completely and openly undone, in the front row of a room full of people, not caring at all who saw it. She held his gaze and she smiled. Not the careful, measured smile she gave to rooms and panels and professional situations. The real one. The one that came from somewhere much deeper than public composure and meant something entirely different and was only ever for a very small number of people. The smile Amina would have recognized. The smile that was entirely hers. He smiled back. Outside afterward. The night air cool and clear, carrying that particular quality of city night air that is never quite fresh but is never quite stale either, the smell of the world still running, still moving, still doing what it does without pause. The sound from inside the venue reached them only faintly now, muffled through the walls. The applause had finished. The voices inside had moved back into the general hum of people talking to each other after an event, the warm specific noise of people who have come together for a reason and are now finding their way back to ordinary life. Senate stood with her wrap around her shoulders and looked out at the street. A few other guests had drifted outside, speaking in small groups, but they had moved away, with the wordless social awareness that people in his proximity tended to develop, giving them space without being asked. Just the two of them, standing together on a quiet stretch of pavement, the city humming in all directions around them. He put his hand on her shoulder. She stood beside him with the star at her throat and her mother's earrings in her ears. She had put those on tonight too, quietly, without mentioning it, and the light from the venue windows catching both. He did not prepare a speech. He was not a man of prepared speeches with the people he trusted, and he trusted her completely. "Your mother saved my number under a star," he said, "because she believed this day was possible. She could see it when I could not. She could see it when there was no evidence for it at all." He paused. She was right. She was always right. Senate was quiet for a moment. The star on the chain caught the light and held it. "She knew," she said softly. "Not sadly. The way you speak about someone whose faith in you turned out to be accurate, with a kind of tender, grateful astonishment. She always knew." Above the city, visible through the glow of 1,000 lit buildings and the amber spread of streetlights, one star burned. Steady and constant. The kind of star that does not compete with the brightness around it and does not need to, it simply remains, doing what it has always done, in the way that things which are genuinely themselves continue to do, regardless of the noise around them. They stood under it for a while. A father and his daughter. Amina's star at her throat. Amina's certainty in both of them, still doing its work. The city moved around them the way cities do, indifferent, continuous, full of its own noise and motion and direction. And the star above it all burned on. The way it always had. The way it always would. Yours. Always yours.